Hello everyone, this is Dr. Speights with Math Videos on PowerPoint. This lesson covers completing the square.
In this section, we want to find the center and radius by completing the square. We want to also identify the equation of a circle and determine the equation of a circle in center radius form and in general form. So recall how to complete the square. Let's do a little bit of practice just to make sure you haven't forgotten it. So anytime you want to complete the square, you have the first two values, which are your x terms, beginning with your squared term and then your x term. So all you have to do is look at your second term and take half of that. So half of 12 is 6. And then square that number. 6 squared is 36. So 36 would be the number that would complete the square. So we would add 36 to the back end of that. And that will make that a perfect square trinomial, which then is going to factor in. Keep in mind, whatever is the square root of the first and the last term, square root of x squared is x, square root of 36 is 6. So it factors into x, and the middle term determines the sign. So it's going to factor into x plus 6 squared. Let's do another one. So we look at the coefficient. We don't care whether it's negative or positive at this point. We just want to know what's half of 14. And half of 14 is 7. 7 squared is 49. So you will need 49 on the back end to complete that perfect square trinomial. And then we're going to factor it. So we know that's going to factor in the square root of t squared is t. The square root of 49 is 7. You use the sign of the middle term to determine what goes inside the parentheses. So that would factor into t minus 7 squared. Let's do one more that may not divide evenly. So we look at our middle term and we say half of 5. So 5 is a number that it's not going to divide evenly and give you a whole number. So what you do is just put a 2 under it because you're still halving it. Half is that 2. And then when you square 5 halves, you're going to get 25 over 4. Which means you're going to add 25 over 4 to the back end of that perfect square trinomial. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 25 over 4 is 5 halves. So you're going to have x minus 5 halves squared. Okay, so that's how you would complete the square. And now that we know how to complete the square, let's go ahead and begin the completing the square process, because we're going to use that to rewrite the equation from general form to regular equation form of a circle. Okay, so just keep in mind when we are writing an equation in these forms, there are 3 possibilities for the graph based on the value of m. So m would be that constant on the right side of the equation. If that number is greater than 0, in other words, it is a positive number, then the graph is going to be an equation of a circle. The equation is going to be that of a circle. Now, if this value here, if it equals 0, then you don't have an equation of a circle. What you have is just a single point. In other words, you have just an ordered pair. So if you find that that value on the right side, when it's in the equation of a circle form, if it's 0, then all you have is an ordered pair point. And if that number is less than 0, meaning it's a negative, then it's not a circle, it's not an ordered pair, it is simply a graph that is non-existent. All right, so let me show you an example. In this example, we're asked to decide whether or not the equation has a circle as its graph. If it does, give the center and radius. If it does not, describe the graph. So we are given the equation in general form. General form is where you'll see all your numbers to the left, 0 to the right. And these terms consist of your x terms, your y terms, and your constants. So what we need to do in order to get it into the equation of a circle form is to gather our like terms. In other words, get your x's together and group them together, then group your y's together so that you can complete the square for each of them. So recall, in completing the square, what you need is the x squared term and then the x term. Same thing with the y's. You're going to need the y squared term and the y. Everybody else, you're going to move them over to the right side of the equation. So let's go ahead and group these. Grouping my x terms and my y terms will look like so. So 25 was the only one that was not part of that group, so we had to move it to the right side of the equation by subtracting 25 from each side. And notice I left a space there to complete the square, so let's go ahead and proceed with completing the square for both sides. So for the x group, we look at the middle term. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So we're going to add 9 to complete that trinomial. For the y group, we look at the middle term of 10 and say, what's half of 10? Half of 10 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So we're going to add 25 to the y group. So let's go ahead and do that, and recall the rules for equations. Whatever you do to the left side, you must also do to the right side. So since we added a 9 and a 25 to the left side of the equation, we had to also add a 9 and a 25 to the right side of the equation. And now we're ready to factor these perfect squared trinomials. To factor the first perfect squared trinomial, we know that's going to factor into x minus 3 squared plus y plus 5 squared equals, and notice on the right side the 25s are opposites of each other. They cancel out so that all you're left with on the right side is just 9. So let's go ahead and write our equation, and there you have your equation of a circle. Now we want to identify whether actually we have an equation. We haven't quite established yet whether it is a circle, a point, or whether it is non-existent. So let's take a look at to see if it is any of those. So recall the rule was that all we had to do was look at the value on the right side of the equation. If this value is greater than 0, then you have a circle. It is an equation of a circle. If this value was 0, you would have a point. And if this value was a negative, it would be a graph that is non-existent. And so since this value is greater than 0, it is a circle. Now let's identify our center. Our center, since it's in the form of x minus, we know that 3 is our x value of our center. Our y value of our center, all we have to do is take the opposite of this, which is -5. So it's going to be at 3, -5. Take the square root of 9, and that will give our radius of 3. So we have a circle with a center of 3 -5, and a radius of 3. Choice C. And so there you have it. In this example, we're asked to decide whether or not the equation has a circle as its graph. If it does, give the center and radius. If it does not, describe the graph. So here we're given the general form of the equation. And recall, in order for you to get it in equation of a circle form, you have to group your x's, group your y's, and move the constant term on the right side. So let's go ahead and proceed with that step of grouping our x and y terms. We move the 18 to the other side by subtracting 8 from each side. And now we're ready to go ahead and proceed with completing the square. Half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So we're going to have both a 9 for both the x and the y terms. It is a 9 that completes those trinomials. So 9 plus 9 is 18. So really we're adding 18 to the left side, which means we're going to have to also add 18 to the right side of the equation. So we can go ahead and factor our trinomials. It's going to factor into x minus 3 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals, and on the other side, since you have opposite numbers, they cancel each other out to 0. We have 0 on the right side. So recall that rule of what happens when the constant or that value on that side is a 0. It tells you whether that is a circle, a point, or whether it's non-existent. Okay, so recall once we get our equation in its form, we are then going to look to the right at the constant. Recall if that number is positive, then it is an equation of a circle. If it is, as in this case, 0, then that means it is simply just a point or an ordered pair. And if it were negative, it would be a graph that is non-existent. So since it is just a single point, let's identify what that single point or ordered pair is. Since it's already in an equation form, we can see that our x value will be 3, and so is our y value. So then the point or the ordered pair is 3, 3. And again, that's choice B, that this is the graph of a point, not a graph of a circle. So the equation of a point. In this example, we're asked to determine whether or not the equation has a circle as its graph. If it does, give the center and radius. If it does not, describe the graph. So here is the general form of the equation. Recall step 1 is to go ahead and group your x terms and then group your y terms. Place the constant on the right side of the equation. So we're going to have to subtract 14 to move that over. Now that we've grouped our terms, we're going to go ahead and proceed with completing the square. So with the x group, we say what's half of 2 is 1. 1 squared equals 1. So we need 1 to complete the x group. For the y group, half of 6 is 3. 3 squared is 9. So 9 will complete the y group. So that means that, let's see, you're adding a total of 10 because 1 plus 9 is 10. So that means we're going to have to also add 10 to the right side of the equation because that's the rules of equations. Let's go ahead and factor those two trinomials. The first is going to factor into x plus 1 squared plus y minus 3 squared. And on the right side of the equation, when we subtract, take the sign from the larger number, that's going to give us a -4. Now we're going to take a look. Now that we have it in equation form, we see the constant on the right side. That number is a -4. Recall that the rules are, if that number is positive, it's a circle. If that number is 0, it's just a point. And if that number is negative, such as in this case, it is a negative, so that means that the graph is non-existent, meaning it is not an equation of a circle, it is not a point, it is a graph. Again, the choice is a graph that's non-existent. Okay, so let's do one that's a little bit more challenging. In this particular example, notice here that with the squared terms, the both x and y, they have a coefficient in front of them. They have a coefficient of 4. Remember, to use the completing the square method, you need the squared terms to have a coefficient of 1. So the first step then is to divide the entire equation by 4. Recall what you do to one side, you must also do to the other. So every term has to be divided by 4. Once we simplify that, with the first term, cancel those 4s, we'll have x squared by itself as should be. We'll also have y squared by itself. 4x divided by 4, that's going to give you x by itself. Negative 16 divided by 4 is going to give you negative 4y. Minus 19 over 4 equals, on the right side, it will equal 0. So once we have that simplified, our next step then, we're going to go ahead and group our x terms and our y terms and move our constant 19/4 over to the right side of the equation by adding it to each side. Now we're going to go ahead and complete the square with our x's. Half of 1 is a half, and 1/2 squared is 1/4. Half of 4 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So we're going to wind up adding a half and 4 to the left side. So we must also add a half, I'm sorry, not a half, a fourth. We're going to be adding a fourth and 4 to the left side, because remember, half of 1 is a half, then you square that and you get 1/4. So again, we're going to add 1/4 and 4 to the left side. So we must add 1/4 and 4 to the right side. So now let's go ahead and simplify that. 19 plus 1 is 20. Keep the denominator of 4. That's going to give you 20 over 4 plus the 4. And what is 20 over 4? Well, 20 over 4, 20 divided by 4 equals 5. And 5 plus 4 equals 9. So all of that on the right side simply equals 9. All right, so let's move on to the next step. All right, so let's go ahead and factor the x's and the y's group. So with the x group of the trinomial, that's going to factor into x plus 1/2 squared plus y minus 2 squared equals 9. And recall that if the constant on the right side is some number greater than 0, then it is an equation of a circle. Now let's find the center and radius of that circle. So putting it in equation of a circle form in our mind mentally, into the x minus h form, we would need to take the opposite of positive 1/2. So then our x value would be negative 1/2. And here, since it is in the form of y minus k, in this instance, our y value would be 2. So the center is located at -1/2, comma 2, and our radius, the square root of 9 is 3, so we have a radius of 3. But yes, this is an equation of a circle, again, with center -1/2, comma 2, radius of 3.